Healthcare stocks have been sick and feeling down, but they're finally starting to get better. So is it time to invest? That's what we're going to address today, followed by a comparison of the top healthcare and biotech ETFs. Normally, you have to pay up for growth, especially now with growth stocks at valuations that are reminiscent of the tech bubble. But there's one area of the market that offers a long term growth potential, could be a big beneficiary of AI, and is the cheapest level it's been in decades. That's healthcare, and particularly biotech. But sometimes things are cheap for a reason. So, to assess whether biotech is a good investment opportunity, let's start with the baseline of why these stocks have been so sick lately. There are four main reasons that healthcare stocks are so cheap right now, all of which are very real and could get worse, but in my mind, are already starting to be largely priced into the market. Some of them are even actually getting better, at least they appear to be. And I think that when we get clarity on some or all of these issues, I think that will open up the sector to re rate to much healthier valuations, as we've seen start already. When a fear discount goes away, stock prices usually go up, or to keep the analogy going, they recover. First, in my mind, is the threat of the most favored nation drug policy. If that comes reality, it'll require companies to align US drug prices with prices in other developed countries, i.e., they'd have to lower their prices a lot. Obviously, that would have a very negative impact on earnings, especially for large pharmaceutical companies with established drugs. Part of the reason the industry has started to recover in the last few days is that we've got some clarity on this, and it wasn't nearly as bad as many people feared that it could be. On September 29th, Trump announced the rollout of Trump RX, which is a direct to consumer platform that offers most favored nation prices on some drugs only to Medicaid patients, which make up a very small amount of most drug sales and are already largely discounted. Even better, it's completely voluntary. This gives healthcare companies the ability to satisfy Trump by giving him a win with only a relatively small sacrifice. Now, don't get me wrong, this will help pass on cost savings to some of the people who need them most. So I'm not saying it isn't going to do any good. I'm just saying that the fears of crushed profits leading to falling R&D spending, less innovation, and a loss of leadership among US pharma companies seem to have been overblown. That's great news for pharmaceutical and biotech stocks. There are still more drug price negotiations ahead, but the worst case scenario seems to have been avoided. The second key risk is related to tariffs. Trump has been saying they were coming soon since March, and last week they finally did. He announced 100% tariffs on branded and patented pharmaceutical products on September 25th. So much for lowering drug prices for Americans, right? But wait, only 1 week after the announcement, the date was supposed to take effect, he paused it. Who's surprised there? Instead, he's giving companies a chance to negotiate, and there's already precedent of Pfizer getting a 3 year delay on their tariffs because they agreed to invest $70 billion in U.S. production. My take on this is that we're not out of the woods yet, and it's still not a great outcome, but it is better than the worst case that had been priced in, and really it's just that level of uncertainty has come down, which gives space for things to start to recover. Pharmaceutical manufacturing is reliant on complex global supply chains, though, and forcing companies to either spend tons of money to reshore production or charging them extra on their imports will hurt their profitability either way, whether they're manufacturing in the US or not. For now, this is a relief because it gives companies a path to delay the tariffs, but there are still a few challenges ahead. One, I'm not sure every company will be as willing to make a deal as Pfizer. We'll see, but foreign governments and companies are starting to notice a pattern that when you make a concession to Trump, he often just comes back later and asks for another bigger one. Number two, bringing manufacturing back to the US involves significant costs. Any investment that's made for a reason other than the company deciding it's the best thing for their business is, by definition, a suboptimal use of money. So even if they can avoid the tariffs, it's by just choosing a less bad outcome. Number three, complex global supply chains mean tariffs will not be completely avoidable for basically anyone. For example, there are key ingredients for a lot of drugs known as active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs, which come mostly or sometimes exclusively from China and India. Those and many other things will still be imported, even if you're manufacturing in the US. I also wonder if those things could end up becoming bargaining chips for trade negotiations, similar to how China limited exports of rare earth metals. We need them, and we don't have them. So that's still a risk to any company that's making drugs in the US. But ultimately, we've gotten some clarity on the tariff issue, and that definitely opens up a path for recovery. The third key risk for healthcare stocks is potential delays in drug approvals due to all the layoffs at the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. That also just got worse, at least temporarily, because the government is shut down and that's causing them to completely stop accepting new drug submissions. We haven't seen huge delays in drug approvals yet, and most government shutdowns don't last that long now, so it's still a risk that the market is worried about, but this one I would put in a lower category than the other two. The fourth main risk, which also applies more to large pharmaceutical companies than smaller biotechs, but can impact both, is that many of them have big patent cliffs coming. A patent cliff basically refers to the period when a drug's patent ends, making it legal for generic drug companies to produce cheap replacements. Pharmaceutical and biotech companies can make billions of dollars a year off of a successful drug. But as soon as the patent expires, that profitability usually, well, falls off a cliff, so to speak. The key to overcoming that is innovation. And that's where the opportunities come in. This is the fun part of the video. Yes, there are a lot of risks, and no, I cannot predict the exact bottom, but I am confident that a lot of those risks are already priced in, and we already seem to have avoided the worst possible outcomes in some of them. So that does create an interesting entry point. You've probably noticed that I've been using both the terms biotech and pharmaceutical, and to 99% of people, those probably sound like the same thing. They actually are almost the same thing, they're very close. And the lines between them have gotten blurred over the years. We even often call them biopharma companies in the industry to reflect that. But generally, just so we're on the same page, I think of biotech as, on balance, a little smaller and more innovative, while pharmaceutical companies are generally larger, more defensive, and well established. Pharmaceutical companies also offer a compelling investment opportunity, but in my mind, they're generally a little more vulnerable to some of the key risks like patent cliffs, tariffs, and price controls, whereas biotechs are a little more exposed to the opportunities in innovation, which we're going to dive into next. All the things we've talked about so far, like stocks being cheap, unloved, possibly in the early stages of a recovery, those apply pretty broadly to healthcare stocks. But there are three reasons, though, I think biotech companies offer the best long term investment opportunity out of all of them. First, patent cliffs are more of a risk for well established, large pharmaceutical companies than smaller biotech companies. Second, that risk for large pharma companies actually creates an opportunity for smaller biotech companies. There are two ways pharmaceutical companies can replenish their pipelines if their big money making drugs are nearing their patent cliffs. They can either hope to innovate themselves, or they can buy innovation by acquiring smaller companies with promising drugs that are working their way through the approval process. When a big company acquires a small company, they usually do it at a significant premium to its current valuation, meaning healthy profits for the investors in the small company. For an added cherry on top, the Trump administration is more favorable to mergers and acquisitions than the last administration was, so that could also provide a boost. Third, and most important, biotech and pharma companies are ripe to benefit from AI. But before we get into why, can I ask you for a quick favor? One thing that constantly amazes me is that 73% of you who watch this channel regularly haven't yet subscribed to it. So if you like this channel and you're getting value out of it, and you want to support us, the free and easy way to do that that would have a massive impact on our lives and cost you absolutely nothing is by simply hitting that subscribe button. And my commitment to you is that if you do that, my partner Cal and I will continue doing everything in our power to help you improve your life by becoming a better investor. Thank you so much. Okay, so the reason that biotech and pharma companies are in such a good position to benefit from AI is that with most major technological advances, it's the enablers of the technology that win at first and the users of the technology that win in the long run. Think AOL versus Netflix with the internet. AOL provided the internet, eventually went bankrupt. Netflix didn't exist when the internet started becoming popular, but now is a massive company that couldn't really exist in its current form without the internet. The number one way biotech and pharma companies can benefit from AI is through improving drug development, both by making it more successful and making it faster. Only 1 out of every 10 drugs that enters a phase 1 drug trial ever gets put on the shelves. Imagine if that could just go to 2 out of 10. That would be huge. And It's not a pipe dream, it's already happening. Just a few weeks ago, Merck signed a deal with Variational AI, which uses generative AI to save millions of dollars and months of precious time when identifying potential molecules, or in layman's terms, trying to discover new drugs. This potential is massive. Think about what AI actually does. It combs through data and makes sense of it much faster than humans can, right? Well, think about it. Pharma companies have tons of data from trials and research that they've done over the course of the years that went nowhere. And there's tons more in scientific publications. There's so many ways that they could go with this. Maybe before it wasn't profitable enough to try to develop a drug for a rare disease, but now they can. Or maybe there was something they missed. I mean, penicillin was an accident. It was a mold that the guy who discovered it wasn't even intentionally testing. Then, when he discovered it, he couldn't purify it and he published his findings, but it went nowhere. It wasn't until over a decade later that other people picked up his research, figured out how to purify it, and now we have antibiotics, and probably hundreds of millions of lives have been saved from them. So, who's to say that there's not some finding out there that went nowhere or some random thing buried in some research paper that might be brought back to life by AI? Who's to say there aren't hundreds of those things? It wouldn't surprise me at all. And in the longer term, beyond AI, quantum computing could be another leg up for drug development, at least according to Sylvia Jablonski, the CEO of the company with the largest quantum computing ETF, who we interviewed on this channel back in July. So there are certainly a lot of risks in healthcare stocks at the moment, and I don't claim to know how they're going to play out over the next few months. But I think if you have a long term time horizon, like say 10 years, the combination of many short term risks driving down valuations and many long term opportunities that aren't yet priced in yet creates a really nice setup for healthcare stocks, especially biotechs. So, how can you invest in those? Well, there are many different ways, so I'm not going to go through all of them, and I'm not going to cover the ones that we do cover super in depth like I do in some other videos, but I'll give you a quick rundown of the main options to show you what's out there and highlight what I see as the most important differentiators between them. Let's start with the one I own personally, XBI, the Spider S&P Biotech ETF. At 35 basis points, it's not the cheapest one out there, but it is one of the cheapest. And the main reason I own this one is the part on the bottom, the average market cap. With 134 holdings instead of most others that are far fewer, it gives me more exposure to a wider range of smaller companies, which is what I wanted. If you wanted to specifically invest in companies that are trying to fight cancer, you could look at CANC, the TEMA Oncology ETF. This one comes at 75 basis points, so not quite as cheap, probably because it's active. This gives you exposure to some bigger companies and some smaller ones. And one thing I particularly like about it is that it's global, which most of the other ones we'll cover are not. I hate to say it, but a lot of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies are outside the United States. AstraZeneca, for example, is known to be one of the most innovative, and a lot of Chinese companies are becoming more prominent too. We'll get to that in a second. This one hasn't been around for long, but it's the only one I know of that specifically targets cancer companies. So if that's what you're looking for, this one is definitely worth considering. Next, there's Genome, which is another more targeted ETF, but this time focused on genomics, meaning specifically advancements related to gene editing, gene sequencing, genetic diseases, etc. It's pretty small with only 50 million of assets, which is probably why it's a little on the expensive side at 50 basis points, even though it's passive. But genomics are definitely an area with a ton of potential, and if you want to focus specifically on those kinds of opportunities, Genome might be for you. If you like genomics but want to take an active and broader approach to finding the best opportunities, take a look at ARKG, the ARC Genomic Revolution ETF. What really makes this one unique is that it doesn't just focus on healthcare companies. It also includes tech, materials, energy, and consumer discretionary companies because it's trying to capture leaders, enablers, and beneficiaries of genomic technologies. Of course, it's still mostly healthcare, but I thought it was an interesting angle that they decided to take. It's a little more expensive than Genome since it's active, but it also has a nice mix of small companies in there with an average market cap of only $9 billion. XBI, the one I own, is in the low 20s, and most biotech ETFs are in the $50 to $60 billion range for their average market cap. So, on balance, the companies in here are much smaller. It's Also, relatively concentrated with over 21% of its assets in just two companies right now, which is probably why it has the potential for extraordinary rises and falls like this one, up over 3x, then it gave it all back, all in about a 2 year period. This was obviously a unique environment, so I'd be surprised if we saw those kinds of extremes again. But concentrated positions in innovative, mostly small companies definitely makes it a high risk, high reward proposition. Looking for something that only invests in small cap stocks? SBIO could be for you. It specifically targets small companies worth no more than $5 billion with drugs in phase 2 or phase 3 trials in the US. I think in theory, this should help identify companies with the best chance to have huge upside, but it's also a way to identify the stocks that are most likely to have huge downside. So, this is a high risk, high reward option. It's passive too, so there's no one assessing how likely these trials are to actually work out. You can see that compared to the NASDAQ Biotech Index in green, it's had nearly identical results over the past 10 plus years since its inception, just with way more volatility. It had a huge spike in 2015, then gave it all back by the end of the year. Then it went on a great run from 2017 to 2020, only to give it all back by 2022. So, biotech isn't for the faint of heart. And just like the ARK ETF we just looked at, this one really isn't for the faint of heart. But if you're looking purely for rapid growth potential, this is probably a good option. You have no idea when it will come, but chances are there will be some more booms and busts with this one in the future. One that I actually am considering buying as a complement to my XBI position is Cure with a K, KURE, the MSCI China Healthcare Index ETF. Remember how I said that there are two ways pharma companies can overcome their patent cliffs: innovate themselves or buy innovation from someone else? Well, pretty much all the big pharma companies in the US and Europe have their business development teams in China right now looking for Chinese innovation that they can acquire. You know why? Because China massively reformed their healthcare industry 10 years ago, and now they're making tons of breakthroughs. They just haven't quite figured out global manufacturing or distribution yet. So they're still selling their innovations for hundreds of millions of dollars when a Western company would sell the same thing for billions of dollars. If they can figure out how to unlock that value, oof, watch out. China is also arguably better placed to take advantage of advancements in AI since they've been much more focused on developing use cases, and their companies have been adopting it much faster than we have in the US. Then again, there's always a risk that the US government does something crazy, like blocking Chinese acquisitions or who knows what else. So there are always extra risks in any industry involved when investing in China. So I wouldn't make this a huge position, but it's definitely on my radar as a small speculative position to buy and hold for the long run. It nearly tripled from its low in 2019 to a high in 2021. Then it gave it all back by 2024. But it's up around 50% year to date, and there's definitely a lot of room to run if things progress as they have been. Now, if you're really bold, you could go for something like BIB, the Ultra, meaning 2x leveraged NASDAQ Biotech ETF. And if that's not enough, you could go with LAVU, which is a 3 times leveraged biotech ETF from Direction. For me, these would be more short term holds where I buy on significant weakness that I consider to be temporary and look to sell when the fear subsided and the ETF recovered. They're not really something I would look to hold for 10 years like the other ones that we've discussed today, since something like this might happen. That's BIB in red and LABU in blue. Yes, sure, if you time it right, it can be great, as you can see from where I cherry picked the bottom on April 8th, but that's harder to do than it seems, so definitely proceed with caution on these. And if this list seems like it only gets riskier and riskier and is not for you, a way to capture some of the upside potential with much less risk than these last few ETFs we've talked about is IXJ, the iShares Global Healthcare ETF. Nothing fancy, just passive global healthcare exposure, including biotechs, but also pharmaceuticals and medical device companies, which are the more defensive areas of healthcare, i.e., less risky. If you just want to capitalize on the cheapness of healthcare stocks without the sleepless nights and added stress that some of these other higher octane ones might give you, this is a solid place to look, and it's just 40 basis points. And I think that just about does it for us. I think I've covered this pretty thoroughly. If I left anything out, please let us know in the comments. Also, please do us a solid and hit that like and subscribe button. It really goes a long way to help the channel. And we put a lot of effort into these videos. And we really want to keep bringing you content that is the most valuable thing we can for you. So let us know what you want to cover next. Hit that like button, subscribe so you won't miss it. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks so much.